Thank you, guys. I actually thought I might start by talking just a minute or two about Parametric. We're fairly unique in what we do. Aside from being a West Coast asset manager, which is already a little bit strange, we're headquartered in Seattle. We have a very unique approach to investing. It's unique in the sense that of the over $200 billion in assets that we manage, 0% of that is actually done with any fundamental research or any type of market forecasting. At which point my father usually asks me, so what exactly do you do at work if you're not doing that? We're busy doing other things. So we're thinking about what are the things you can control. Things you can control are things such as costs, such as turnover and taxes. I think manager fees get a lot of press in the news about how much of a drag they are on returns, but actually taxes can be an even larger drag on returns over the long run for taxable investors. So that's one example of things we control. Another example of things we control for clients are risks. So some of our clients come to us because they have a very specific need. Perhaps they're an executive and they have a very large concentrated position in one stock. Can you manage a completion portfolio around that one stock? Absolutely. Other clients come to us and they say, actually, I want to make sure I get broad market exposure. I want to make sure that I'm, well aligned with this benchmark that I care about. So we control those risks for them. We deliver on that promise to give them that equity-like exposure that they're interested in. And we do this primarily through separately managed accounts. It is really the third way that I think we're pretty unique. Most managers run commingled vehicles such as ETFs and mutual funds. They do this because they're cost effective, at which point my dad asked me, well, then why would you work harder and do it in an SMA? Because we can make it so custom for our clients. And we can run these mandates as low as $250,000 for most exposures. And we can customize things such as adding Catholic values overlay to a portfolio. So with that, that's a little bit about Parametric, but now I really want to turn to our responsible investing capabilities. I sit on the investment strategy team, and I'm one of the dedicated members on our responsible investing team. I think there's a clicker here. Here we go. So we've been running responsible investing portfolios for our clients for over 20 years. We now have over 20 billion in AUM. This represents over 2,000 separately managed accounts. So lots of things have changed since the late 90s when we got our first client. But one thing that has not changed for us is our mission. So we firmly believe that understanding our clients' goals is crucial to what we do. So I'll get into that a little bit more, but I've talked a lot about things that make us unique. I think a fourth thing that makes us unique in the responsible investing space is that we're not trying to impose our values on our clients. So we're not going to try to tell you, you need to be a Catholic values investor, or you need to add this screen criteria to your account. Rather, our clients tell us what's important to them, and we help them implement that. We do this, we have success in this because we partner with dedicated providers such as IWP, such as ISS, who you heard from earlier today, MSCI ESG Research, Sustainalytics, just to name a few. You also see on the slide we are members of many prominent organizations in the space, the PRI, Ceres, ICCR, and the Council of Institutional Investors. So our expertise is in running portfolios, controlling what we can control. We look to our dedicated research providers to give us that expertise. So when I say understanding our client goals is key, we really think about having really two paths to consider here. And I'll start on the right-hand side. So for many clients, they're not actually interested in divesting in their portfolio. What they're actually interested in is in corporate change. And so this was well covered earlier today, so I won't spend too much time on it. But if you're interested in corporate change and getting companies like Netflix to behave differently, you've actually got to look towards active ownership within public equities. You could also alternatively look towards the impact side of things. But for public equity investors, real change is really met through active ownership. So thinking about how you vote your proxies, whether you delegate that authority to Parametric or whether you retain it yourself, that's completely under your control within that separately managed account, which I think is a pretty cool thing, actually. So you don't have to, because you're not invested in a commingled vehicle, you don't have to let that manager vote for you. Although in this case, that manager is parametric, and I think we do a good job, but you could retain it for yourself. And so we see that among our client base, that many of them do decide to delegate voting authority to us and adopt our guidelines, but others want to vote them themselves, and that's great. We also help our clients file shareholder resolutions. So one thing that is also interesting about a separately managed account is that you actually own the underlying stock, which means if you own enough of it and for long enough, you can actually file your own shareholder resolution, which is pretty powerful. So I promised I wouldn't spend too much time on active ownership, but I did just want to say it's very important to Parametric, and it's an important strategy that our clients employ. So I didn't want to give it too short of shrift. But I will spend most of my time talking about what's on the left-hand side of the page, because a lot of clients come to us, 20 billion worth of clients come to us, because they want to align what they own with their values. And when I hear that, when our team hears that, we think about portfolio construction. We think about screens and criteria and definitions that we can create for them. Integration is a technique that we have been using to build ESG portfolios for clients. So for clients who don't have a particular divestment need, so maybe they don't need to divest away from tobacco manufacturers, but they are interested in holding companies with above average ESG scores and underweighting companies with low ESG scores. That's where our integration could help them. So our process is very client-led. I like to think of us as, it's somewhat of a bad word to say today, but somewhat like the Chipotle of restaurants. So we don't tell you what you want to eat. You tell us what you want to eat. So you choose your equity exposure, and your equity exposure can be any number of things. It can be an S&P 500, it could be a factor-based or smart beta portfolio. You can even start with an existing responsible investing index or strategy. So again, that's completely up to you. I'd say recent trends that I've seen from clients, I'm seeing a lot of benchmark blends, I'm seeing a lot of global ACWI portfolios. Step 2, what ESG criteria is important to you? And again, we leave that entirely up to you. And the answer may be none. But for 20 billion of our clients, they're interested in environmental issues, social issues, faith-based issues. Most of these we're able to offer completely for free, and you can select any number of topics that are interesting to you. So this is where my dad would say, so again, what do you do all day? So we do the third part. So once you've told us what you're interested in, we want to deliver on two things. We want to give you those underlying equity returns that you're interested in, whatever they might be, and then we want to minimize any deviation away from that based on what values are important to you. So this is just a quick slide just to mention kind of who we are and set us aside from other investors. But you cannot invest directly in a benchmark. I think that's well known. The difference between what we do and what an active investor might do is that active investor is intentionally trying to outperform that benchmark. Whereas actually we're trying to hug that benchmark as closely as possible. So I've mentioned tracking error a little bit, but to formally define it, it measures the deviation of the portfolio from the benchmark. So typically, you hire active investors because you want them to have high tracking error. So you would love for them to have 5% tracking error, for example, from the benchmark. You would especially love it if that tracking error was always positive. On the other hand, passive investors like Parametric, we're striving for the lowest possible tracking error. So typically, we try to look for under 1%, if not better, for our clients. But this is going to vary depending on the criteria that you've placed in your account. These are some examples of realized tracking error. So looking at the top, you can see the tracking error probably from a passive manager has been realized of about 50 basis points over time. So we would consider that to be very tightly tracking. So the performance of the portfolio is a lot like the benchmark. I think important to keep in mind is that tracking error is a plus or minus number. To use a technical term, it's the wobble around the benchmark. And then beneath that, you can see the tracking error of 5%. I like to bring up this slide because a lot of times you talk about tracking error in kind of this abstract term, and clients are like, oh, I'm fine with 3% tracking error, I'm fine with this. But in fact, when push comes to shove and you see a 5% difference, keep in mind a few things. One, that's a 1 standard deviation event. So that means that 2/3 of the time you expect to see plus or minus 5% from your manager if the tracking error is 5%. But if you think about that, that's only 2/3 of the time. So a 2 standard deviation event would be plus or minus 10%, a 3 standard deviation event plus or minus 15%. So all of a sudden, that benchmark that you care about with 5% tracking error, you could see deviations plus or minus 10, 15%, 1/3 of the time. Not on here is the other type of tracking error, which is called predicted tracking error. So while realized tracking error obviously tells you about what happened in the past, predicted tracking error is actually a measure that we use most commonly at Parametric because it tells us about how the portfolio is sitting today and how we might expect it to react to things in the near future. And so PTE, or predicted tracking error, is very common for us to throw around at Parametric. It's how I evaluate looking at client portfolios. When a client asks me, I've selected these 10 screens, how do you think my portfolio might do? I'm going to quote to them the predicted tracking error. It's how our portfolio managers manage portfolios. It's how they grade themselves. So we actually think predicted tracking error is even a better measure to tell our clients because it's going to give you a sense of what might occur in the future. So continuous management. This slide is on here just to give a sense of, once you've gone through the work of telling us what equity exposure is important to you, what values are important to you, perhaps tax management is something that you need in your portfolio, that's where Parametric really takes over. And so this slide talks a lot about our continuous tax management. If you're not a taxable investor, you might actually start at 3. So again, at step 3, we really want to give you that exposure and honor your values. And we do this through step 4, where we align the sectors, the industries, the market cap weights of the securities that you own. And we do all this through technology. So we have our own optimization software that allows us to do this in a very scalable way. I mentioned we run 2,000 separately managed accounts in our responsible investing strategies. We have many multiples of that in our custom core product overall. So this is a Catholic investing conference, and I haven't talked too much about Catholic values. Faith-based investors are a very large and important part of our client base. We're fortunate to have a very diverse client base made up of both high net worth investors as well as institutional investors. It's a good mix of taxable and non-taxable. But faith-based investors are really at the heart of what we do. And so for that reason, some commonly requested themes are our Catholic values portfolio. And so what you see up on the screen is what we call strategies, are really our homegrown benchmarks. So these are homemade benchmarks that Parametric has created because we, again and again, keep hearing repeated themes. So you'll notice that our Catholic values strategy does use the IWP Capital FFV screen. So that's our off-the-shelf, ready-to-go benchmark for clients who are interested in Catholic values investing. Many clients think about it, and then they actually think, well, wait a minute, I wanted to define Catholic values in my own way, which is totally fine. There's no pressure from us to just choose one of our strategies. There's no extra fees for our strategies. So for the clients who want to define it for themselves, they go to our screen menu, which looks a lot like a sushi menu, and that's somewhat intentional. So here's where you might select any number of themes.